Good evening. If you have a Bible with you, you may want to be in Matthew chapter 7. We've all heard the line before, "Judge not, that you be not judged." And sometimes that line is even serious when people say it, and they actually mean, "Judge not, that you be not judged." I know personally, I tend to say this line fairly frequently on a regular basis, but when I do it, it's mostly sarcasm. I've expressed an opinion that people didn't particularly gel with, and I say, "Oh, judge not that you be not judged. Leave me alone." But some people take that seriously, and they think, if they pull Matthew 7 and verse 1, they think, oh, doesn't Jesus at some point say, you can't be a judge, you can't be judgmental about anything, and you should just leave me alone and let me live how I want to live? I'll do my thing, and you'll do your thing, and we'll coexist in two different ways and leave each other alone, and it's fine. Just let me do whatever I want to do. Did Jesus ever say that? Of course not. We all know the answer is no. But let's dive into that a little bit and investigate what Jesus is actually saying. If you're in the Sunday morning adult Bible class, you'll probably have heard me talk about context at some point. Context is really important when you're reading the Bible. It's very important to keep things contextualized like they should be. And when you rip Matthew 7 and verse 1 out of verses 2 through 6, you kind of lose the real point that Jesus is talking about. Judge not, but there's a caveat. There's several caveats, actually. Some different things we need to talk about in terms of judging people. One preemptive question before we even get into the text. We're going to talk a lot about judgment tonight. So what does it mean when we say judging here? In context, if you look down at verse 5, you'll see a picture of a person who is trying to point out someone's wrong and then fix that wrong, help them through it, turn them around to the right side of things, take them away from evil and push them towards good. That's the idea of judging. It's not, a judge in a courtroom. We're not talking about a courtroom here. We're talking about helping people be righteous. How do you correct people? How do you deal with them? That's the idea of judgment that Jesus is talking about. And there is an order to how you judge. Before you jump on someone else's case, you'd better make sure that you're clean to do it. Matthew 7, let's read verses 1 through 6. Some people attribute 6 to a different topic, or they put 6 with verse 7. I think it goes with the first 5 verses. That's what we'll cover tonight. Matthew 7 and verse 1, I've got New King James. "Judge not that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me remove that speck out of your eye,' and look, a plank is in your own eye? You hypocrite! First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and they turn around and tear you to pieces." One of the outlines suggested for this section talks about what Christians should and shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be judges. We shouldn't be hypocrites. We should be helpers to those who are in need. I'm not using that outline. That's a good outline. File that away and someone else preach that sometime. Instead, we're going to look at a situation in which you shouldn't judge, the situations in which you should judge or you are allowed to judge, and then thirdly, we're going to end with verse 6 and look at what happens when judgment is ignored. I think that's what verse 6 is about. Firstly, as you read through this, the first thing that strikes us is this prohibition that is judge not. And as much as we're going to say and reinforce that idea that that is not an absolute command, there are instances that Jesus talks about in which you should not be the one to judge. So what are those? Judge not, that you be not judged. Or jump down to verses 3 and 4. You look at the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't consider the plank in your own eye. How can you say to someone, "I can fix your problem," when you can't even fix your own? There are 3 basic instances in which you should not be a judge. The first one is, I think in verse 1, you shouldn't be a judge if you don't understand the responsibility you're undertaking for yourself. Judge not that you be not judged. Verse 1, the basic command. Don't judge unless you want judgment on yourself. Do you understand what that means? Because what that is a proclamation that as I judge, as I look on someone else and condemn what they're doing as evil, and as I go in and I try to fix someone else, God takes that and he applies it to me. This is an intensification idea. You're not going to be judged as severely unless you judge other people, in which case God will up the prerequisite for you. In James, we're told that not many of us should be teachers, because when you teach others, you incur a stricter judgment on yourself. This is that same kind of idea. If you're going to instruct someone else and what they're doing is wrong, you better be aware that there's a consequence for that. You have a responsibility. If you're going to be an instructor in this way, you have to deal with the consequences of it. If you are not fit to judge, do not judge. And the first thing you have to do is take an accounting of what that's actually going to do. There are a lot of people who are going to stand before God on Judgment Day and get a very harsh sentence because they were harsh with everybody else. And they're not going to understand why. Because they don't realize what they're committing to when they enter into judgment and correction of others. God will not look favorably on those who proclaim that they are holier than these other people. So be careful with that, especially when it's not even true. If you don't appreciate the difficulty of the job, don't do it. But a lot of people do understand that the job is difficult and that it's going to incur judgment on them, and then they do it anyway because they haven't actually thought about where they stand. A second reason you shouldn't be a judge of people, or when you should not judge people, is if you're the one who's the problem. You shouldn't go out and judge others if you can't fix yourself. Verses 3 and 4. Why do you look at that speck in your brother's eye? You see he has a problem? You see he has a piece of sawdust in his eye. It's not comfortable. It's not helpful. It's getting in his way. And you think I can really help him by going in and removing it. But as I've heard it said, you have the 2x4 sticking out of your face. How are you going to be able to help someone with an eye surgery? You can't get near the person. You can't see clearly. What happens when you condemn others, but you yourself are condemned? Jesus brings up this idea later on. If the blind lead the blind, they're both going to end up in the pit. Or you can look at other examples in which sinners lead other people into further sin. We're told that, what's his name? Amnon in 2 Kings 13, he had a friend, or 1 Kings 13, 2 Samuel 13, I'm messed up. Amnon had a friend named Jonadab who inspired him to do further and further evil. That's no friend at all. What happens when someone who has a massive drinking problem goes to someone else who has a minimal drinking problem and says, hey, you have a problem, let me fix that for you? Or someone who lies all the time goes to someone else and says, hey, I caught you telling me one lie, let's fix your issue. Or when someone else who has murdered 30 people goes to one who's murdered 3 and says, well, you have a problem, clearly. How does that come across? Is that going to be helpful? It's not helping your case, and it's certainly not going to help theirs. If you're the one who's the problem, you don't get to tell other people that they're the problem. If you're corrupt, don't go around judging people. You hypocrite. Why would you do something like that? And the third one is similar to it. You can't judge if you're not willing to evaluate yourself. Some people are corrupt and they're evil and they know it and they go out and judge others anyway. But some people are just unaware, are totally blind to the fact that they have a problem in their eye. I think it's important here to ask the question, Jesus is using speck versus plank or a piece versus a log, a small amount of a problem versus a large amount of a problem. And he says, if you have the large problem, you don't get to judge someone else with a small problem. Well, one might look at that passage and say, well, if I have the little problem, I can judge those with the big problem. But I don't really think that's what Jesus is saying. You can disagree with me if you want to. You're always free to do that, by the way, just so you know. You can disagree with me on that, but I don't think that Jesus is talking about relative amounts of how many lies I've told or how many people I've murdered or whatever it is. I believe that Jesus is talking about the people who have issues and they don't even see them, and they look right past them, and they correct other people like they are perfect themselves. For those people, the smallest of issues, if it's an unseen sin, if it's the sin they are unaware of, that becomes a massive issue. Because every sin separates you from God, and if you don't know what your sin is, it's insidious, you're still separated from God, even if it is objectively just a little sin. You need to be careful with that. Jesus isn't saying, well, if you have only one sin against you, you're fine to judge others. Just don't have 10 sins against God. He's saying, if you have sin, be careful. If you're not willing to check yourself, you need to be careful checking other people. If you're not willing to judge yourself first, you need to make sure you're not going to jump and judge other people. It's not that you have to be perfect before you can give anyone a bit of advice, but it is that you have to be trying before you can give anyone a bit of advice. If you look out at this world, and even as you look out at various churches throughout this nation and all others, there are a lot of people who don't understand that and who judge even though they're not righteous and even though they're not really trying to be, or they're just unaware of their situation. Judge not if you don't understand what it means. Judge not if you are the bad guy. Judge not if you're not willing to take accountability for your own actions. These are ways in which you definitely should not be judging other people. So what would be situations in which we should judge other people? Or maybe what should be situations in which you can judge other people? We'll talk about whether you should or if it's just an option a little bit later on. But I would suggest, just as you see those 3 reasons you shouldn't judge, Jesus mirrors it and says, here are the same 3 reasons you should judge. Don't judge if you don't understand the responsibility. You should judge if you do understand it. Verse 2, with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Be careful how you judge. But if you are aware of the consequences it brings, if you are aware that it's going to incur the stricter judgment, you can go ahead. Just be very careful with that. Be wise in how you approach the situation. If you understand the responsibility you're undertaking, if you understand that God is the judge ultimately and He will hold you accountable, then yes, you can step in and do some of His job. You can take on judging and you can judge others, but God will hold you accountable if you do not represent Him well. One of the blessings of being made in the image of God is we can do things that look like God. We can take on some of the roles that God fills: protector, provider, father, and judge. But if we do those things poorly, we're held accountable for them. Be careful with it. Recognize what you're stepping into. It's very clear. What you do will be measured back to you. And as much as you give, you will receive. Be careful with what you sign up for. You don't want to overcommit yourself. At the very least, if you understand the responsibility, it helps you realize that you should be a little bit more merciful in the judgments that you give. You can judge if you know what you're getting into. Second thing is you can judge if you are righteous. How can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck out of your eye, verse 4, when look, a plank is in your own eye? But what is it? Hypocrite, verse 5. First remove that plank from your own eye, and then remove the speck from your brother's. 2 things here. Number 1, if you're righteous, if you've gotten the plank out of your eye, if you've gotten that 2x4 gone, you are in a position to judge and judge righteously. You are in a position to fulfill the role of God in that situation. But also, it should be noted, this is an expectation. When Jesus speaks in verse 5, He's not saying you can see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye if you want to. He's not saying now you have the option to. He says you will see clearly to remove that speck from your brother's eye. That is a command. Some people look at judgment and they say, well, if I just don't judge anyone else, if I never tell anyone that they are wrong, then God will do the same to me, and God will never tell me that I am wrong. If I never tell anyone else that they're a sinner, God can never tell me that I'm a sinner, because by the standard I use, I will be measured by that same standard. That's my get out of jail free card, is I just never condemn anything, and then I will never be condemned. But actually failing to judge righteously is condemnable, isn't it? God is just. It's one of his defining characteristics. God expects that judgment will be done, and God holds his people accountable to do it. When God calls a people in Matthew chapter 18, your brother sins against you, you don't ignore it. You go to him. It's a command. You go to him, and you try and fix the problem. When Ananias and Sapphira come before the church in Acts chapter 5, Peter judges them pretty harshly. It's not that Peter ever is perfect. You can see before Acts chapter 5, Peter messes up all the time. You can see over in Galatians 2, Paul writes about how Peter messes up all the time after that as well. But it is, when you come before God, judgment is expected from God's people. You go to, it's not just Acts chapter 5 or Matthew 18, you also go to 1 Corinthians 5. There's an evil person in the church. He's living with his father's wife. That kind of immorality is not even known among the Gentiles, and you all accept it? Expel that evil person from among you. Well, that's judgment. Judgment is not optional, as much as we would like it to be. There are situations in which you're not fit to be the judge, but judgment is expected and required. If you are not righteous, you need to get righteous to be right with God. But once you're righteous, you're expected to tell other people how to be righteous as well. It's a serious responsibility, but it comes with the territory of trying to be like God. And just as much as God will pass judgment on you for being too harsh on those you deal with, God will also pass judgment on you for not warning the people that you deal with. Judge if you are righteous. You should. It is a command. When you should judge, make sure you're righteous, but then go out and do so. In the same way, you have to examine yourself. We have that little phrase in 1 Corinthians 11, and it often comes up when we're at the Lord's Supper table. Each person is to examine himself, and so doing, take of the bread and the cup. You're supposed to be examining yourself a lot more than just once on a Sunday. God is calling you to check yourself. Whenever you see evil in a person, it's an opportunity to check yourself. Instead of immediately jumping and fighting against that person and declaring that they're a sinner and that they're separated from God, you take a moment and you consider where you are at. If I see someone sinning, have I never sinned before? Am I perfect before God? If I'm not, there's some self-evaluation before I can step in and stop that person. Before I can step in and pass them a warning, I have to examine myself. Yes, judge, remove the speck that's in your brother's eye, but first you have to clear out the plank that's in your own, whatever that plank is. When you see someone sinning, swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger comes to mind. If you see someone engaging in something evil, instead of immediately jumping on their case and condemning them, first make sure that you're not doing something evil. And then, with the wisdom and the humility from that experience, go and talk to that other person. See if that doesn't make you more merciful in your dealings with others. See if that doesn't make you more understanding and more able to help them. You should judge, but you have to examine yourself. In other words, what Jesus is saying is keep judgment in the natural order of things. You want to make sure that you are right, and only when you are right can you go and help make other people right. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, in verse 16, the end of that chapter over there, Paul has been talking to Timothy a bunch of different various and sundry pieces of advice for being a preacher and a teacher of God's word, and he ends with these things. 1 Timothy 4 and verse 16, he says, take heed to yourself and to your doctrine. Your teaching, other translations say. Continue in them. Why? Because in doing so, you will save both yourself and those who hear you. Paul talks about how he can preach and teach the gospel and convert everyone else, but if he doesn't check himself, he will be lost anyway. He says to Timothy, the first important thing is that you make sure you are righteous. You make sure the things you're teaching are righteous. Before you go out and tell anyone else they're unrighteous, make sure that you are good with God. Only then is your teaching really going to be helpful for you and for the other person. The primary person you are responsible for in your life is you. You're the only one you can control the reactions of. You're the only one you can control the actions of. You're the only one you can control the thoughts of. It's just you. So check yourself first. And then, as you are able, help other people as well. Ultimately, you're not responsible for them. Someone said to me earlier today, God is really committed to our free will. I forget who said it, but it's absolutely true. God is very willing that we can make our own choices. Be careful with that, because you're in charge of yourself. But you don't have to feel bad when somebody else doesn't respond. And I think that's the message that you have in verse 6. Various Bibles or various teachers will split verse 6 into a few different things. Some people think it's kind of a jump and it's just a different topic. I don't really think so. It fits in with 1 through 5 too well. Some people think it goes with 7 through 11. I don't really think so. I don't see much of a connection between those two. I think it goes here with verses 1 through 5 because it deals with rejection. Don't give what is holy to the dogs. Don't cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. You're in charge of you, but what happens when you go out? What happens when you cleanse yourself? What happens when you get a good mindset? What happens when you humble yourself and you repent and you pour all your effort into making yourself right with God? You finally get in a position where now you are righteous and now you are able to correct somebody else, and you go to them in the gentlest way possible and you say something to them and they just say no. Did you know that people don't like being told no? People don't like it when you say anything contrary to what they're doing. Not everyone will listen. Proverbs is full of advice for talking to people and working with people, and one of the bits of advice is, you'll know a fool by the fact that he won't listen to you. How many people are foolish in the world? And that can be out in the world. That can be in your own family. That can even be among church members, much as we don't like to admit that sometimes. How many people like to be told that they're wrong, or that they're doing something that's going to end up in hell, or maybe you say it a little bit nicer than that. Maybe you say you're going against God, and God wouldn't like it when you do that. How many people like being told that? Or do human beings tend to react by turning around and giving it right back to the person? What happens when the dogs turn and tear you to pieces? What happens when the pigs ignore the valuable thing you've given them and eat you instead? Pigs are nasty creatures for a variety of reasons, but one of them is they're carnivorous, and they go after even the humans that feed them. What do you do in that situation? Not everyone listens to you. Usually when we read verse 6, it gets summed down to something like, misallocating something valuable can bring problems on you. But that's not exactly helpful. What exactly does verse 6 mean? I don't know. I'll give you that one. I'm not sure exactly what Jesus is saying, but I've heard it translated or interpreted two ways, so I'll give them both to you. They're both true and accurate, and they both have good things to think about. It could be he's saying it's a command to give up at some point. There are people in this world who just will not have what is holy. And whatever God is trying to give them, however many times you issue God's call to them, somebody hears it, and they hear it the first time and ignore it, and they hear it the second time and ignore it, and they hear it the 20th time and they still ignore it. Jesus may be saying there is a point at which you need to give up and move on and go to greener pastures, as it were. Give the pearls, give the valuable stuff to something that will appreciate it. It's not to prejudge people. It's not to look at someone and say, well, they probably wouldn't listen to the Bible, so I'm just not going to talk to them about it. But it is to say, if you try and try and try again, there may come a time at which you say, there's nothing more I can do. And maybe you just leave it at that point. And the person had ample opportunity, and now they are judged based on their opportunity to hear it and their unwillingness to listen to it. It may be that you leave it for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, and that person matures a bit and comes back to you. It may be that you introduce the topic again after a while, and maybe you have a better conversation, but there's a point at which you might just have to give up. When you figure out what that is, let me know, because I'm very bad at that. But maybe you should just give up at some point. Over and over again, at some point it's not worth it. Find someone who will listen. Jesus said if they don't listen to you, wipe the dust off your feet and go somewhere else, because the gospel needs to spread. And if we're all just working on the people who will not listen, we're never going to spread the gospel. Maybe give up at some point. I don't know how to make that determination, but that may be what he's saying. I think that's what he's saying. The other option is maybe this is not a command. Maybe this is just a piece of advice to remind you that spreading the gospel, correcting people is going to be tough. Be careful when you're around the pigs. They may turn and tear you to pieces. Be careful when you correct a fool. Proverbs is full of this. When you correct a fool, be very careful. They're going to turn and they're going to give you everything they have because they don't want to listen. That doesn't mean there's not value in trying. It doesn't mean there's no value in giving them an opportunity. But it does mean that when you go to have that conversation, you know it's probably not going to end very well or very comfortably. Maybe we need to be okay with that. And no, it's going to be difficult. If I had to pick between the two, I think Jesus is saying the first one, but I could be convinced of either. Both of them remind me of Matthew 18, one of, if not the most important chapter in the Bible, if I had to calculate it, just so you know. Matthew 18 is all about how to deal with other people in the church. When you have a problem, when someone sins against you, how do you deal with it? You don't just bring it up in public. You go to them privately, and then you go to them with a few people, and then you go to them with the elders, then you go to them with the church, and if nothing works, then at some point you just have to cast them out, and they are to you as a Gentile and an unbeliever. It's a call for disfellowship if someone is so stubborn and will not come to Jesus, but it's also potentially an opportunity. Now that they're a tax collector and a Gentile, I can evangelize to them like a tax collector and a Gentile. I don't know. Leave that, think about that. I'm not exactly sure where to go with this. Command or advice, both of these are true points. Whether or not you ever reach the point of cutting someone off entirely, know it's going to be a difficult path to get there. If someone will not listen, it's going to be a tough time, and it's not going to be enjoyable. Know that going in, but spread the word of God as best you can. At the very least, what Jesus is saying is you should plant a seed. Give them an opportunity. Give them exposure to the word. Mention something about God and leave it in their minds. Maybe they do something with it. Maybe they never do. But like Ezekiel was called to do, you proclaim the word, and whatever happens is up to that other person. Again, you can't control everyone else. You can just control yourself. So judge and judge righteously. Know that that's going to end in some displeasure among the people that you're judging. But it's worth it because that's what righteousness looks like. When you're dealing with this idea of judgment, people like to quote the first line, "Don't judge," and then leave it there. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. Just like everything in the Christian life, things seem simple from the outset, and then you dive into some of the minutiae, and it can get very complex very quickly. But remember, if you are unfaithful, you need to fix yourself first. If you are faithful, you need to correct the evil that's around you. And no matter what, whatever pushback you get, don't stop trying to point out evil in other people. Don't stop trying to teach others about Jesus, because that's what we're called to do. We are not called to be the ultimate judge. As you pass judgment, remember, God will deal with you according to how you deal with others. Be careful about that. We're not called to be judges. We're definitely not called to be hypocrites, condemning evil when we ourselves are full of it. But we are called to be the brother and sister who cleanse ourselves and then go into the other brother or sister and remove that speck and try to help them see God clearer. This is a call to be careful. This is a call to be balanced. And ultimately, it's a call to let God have the final say. Whenever you see someone doing evil in the church or outside, take an opportunity. Evaluate yourself. Make sure you're not falling into the same trap they are. And then as you're able to, try to help them out of that trap. You don't want to be the first time they hear about the problem to be on Judgment Day before God. And that's where we'll leave it with judging for now. Hopefully that is beneficial for you to think about. It's not really something to teach you on how to be closer to God or how to come to Jesus and be saved. But if you're here, you've probably heard me talk about it before, and so we'll leave it there. If there's anything we can do spiritually to help shore you up, to help you be more Christ-like and live like Him and emulate Him in your life, anything that we can do to be a spiritual building for you, just let me know. I'll be standing right here. You can come talk to me as we all stand and we sing this song together.